This is Tom Moore with the Akron Symphony, and I am here tonight with welcome to ASO Conversations. Our guest tonight is Chris Albanese. Chris is director of the Akron Symphony Chorus and an assistant professor of choral conducting at Indiana University. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Tom, thank you so much. Great to be here with you in remote capacity.
So, excellent. So, start off with a little bit of a quick question here. You've had some big news in your life in the last month or so.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to share a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. We, my wife Cassandra and I welcomed our firstborn son into the world on April 5th, Sunday, April 5th at 6:22 p.m., which coincidentally was the same time that his older 5-year-old cousin was also born at 6:22 p.m. On May 18th, 2015. So a neat little connection there. But so life has been filled with joy and all the the sleepless nights associated with the early days of parenthood. So, but it's really been quite an adventure so far, and we're really happy.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
So let's. I always kind of like to start these by going back to the best place to start is the beginning. So can you kind of talk a little bit, how did you first become involved with music? Did someone encourage you? Were you inspired by someone? How'd you begin your journey?
Sure, yeah. So I actually grew up in Northeast Ohio on the west side of Cleveland. And when I was around the age of 4, my mother enrolled me in a Delcros class at a music school in Lakewood, Ohio. At the time, it was the Koch School of Music, and now then the Riverside School of Music, and then it's no longer there in the building where it was off of Detroit Avenue. But so my experience started with Delcros, learning basic improvisation, connecting movement and gesture to music and sound. And in many ways, I look back on those experiences, although I don't remember them that vividly at 4 years old, it was the foundation for my musical life in so many ways, both in terms of, how I relate gesture to sound as a conductor, but then also my Delcros teacher at the time then also became my piano teacher. And I studied all the way up through high school and then eventually went on to pursue a double degree in music education and vocal performance at the University of Dayton for my undergrad, and then went on to move to Chicago and do church work for a number of years before returning for a master's at Northwestern in vocal performance, and then eventually the doctorate at CCM, University of Cincinnati, and then out to San Francisco with Chanticleer, and then IU and back here to Akron. So it's been wonderful to rekindle musical connections here in Northeast Ohio too, and build some roots back in this community.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So when did you it first start to dawn on you that, hey, I can make a living in music. I can make this be my career?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there was ever a moment where I thought, I can do this. I think I just kind of did it. I knew that it's where I got my energy from. Like so many in my generation, I was told growing up to follow my dream. And fortunately, that dream, for me, mostly panned out, although it's taken, winds and turns along the way. The way that my career looks right now is different than maybe I expected that it would. Is when I was an undergrad or even a graduate student. And but it was sometime around, I'd say early on in my undergrad when I realized, hey, this is something that I can do. And I don't think there was ever, for me, fortunately, much of a doubt about it. Mm-hmm. I certainly had other interests and thought, I could do other things with my life. I could be of service to the world in other ways. But the music is just kind of where it is, and the relational aspect of music was always very important to me too, and connecting with groups of people and the collaborative process really spoke to me. And there's something to me that's still just so beautiful about that, and I learn more about every day through my interactions as a conductor, a chamber musician, collaborator, and in so many different ways.
So when you first started out, did you think you were going to be a performer? Or did you always decide, have a goal that I'm going to be a director? I'm going to be in front of the chorus as opposed to being part of the chorus?
I think I always kind of knew, even when I was pursuing performance. I mean, it was deeply embedded in me. I come from a long line of teachers in my family. The idea of teaching, conducting, facilitating experience to me was something that was always there. And really every step of the way, even as I was, pursuing a performance career and working in opera, concert oratorio work, conducting opportunities and teaching opportunities just kept kind of naturally finding me. Even through my time with Chanticleer early on, I was asked to serve on the education committee, and then was presenting and facilitating master classes and clinics around the U.S. and abroad, and in all sorts of different places. And so that teacher side, the conductor side, just never really left. Just always, and even when I kind of left it for a while, it kept pulling me back in too.
So do you see, is there kind of a parallel or correlation between teaching and conducting? Is that kind of, do you see that connection between the two?
Absolutely. Yeah. To me, you really can't divorce the two from one another. Because a conductor, in addition to leading and preparing the chorus in rehearsal, is also demonstrating and communicating a vision for the music through the powerful vehicle of gesture, too. And just like any teacher finds in the classroom, or now that I'm learning as a new parent too, and I will learn more and more as Heath, our son, grows older. The most effective way to lead so often is through example, through simple instruction, straightforward instruction, straightforward instruction delivered with great intention. And that's something that I've learned in my life as a teacher. It's something that I've learned in my life as a conductor as well, the value of clarity, how to lead and facilitate an effective rehearsal and effective performance through my physicality, through my body language. And then that body language, the gestural component, is inextricably linked to my knowledge and my understanding of the score, which is based in so many other things too: historical context, who the composer was, when she was composing, what were the circumstances, in the world around them at the time, and how is that manifest in the rhetoric of the music. And these are things that I just really enjoy engaging in and enjoy bringing others into, just as any good, any effective teacher would.
Okay. So let's kind of talk a little bit about, we're going to go a little bit into like how the actual sausage is made. When you decide that, okay, we're going to have a chorus concert, how do you go about preparing a full chorus from that very beginning of the rehearsal? Walk us through to the actual performance night.
Sure. So for any particular cycle, for example, with the Akron Symphony Chorus, with my teaching and working out of town in Bloomington, I typically travel in every other Monday or so, and that schedule is more consolidated around performance times. So for any given concert, for example, for Mozart Requiem, we had about a total of 8 rehearsals, let's say. And in the beginning, the way that I conceive of the rehearsal process in the kind of the larger scale, the global scale, is akin to an hourglass, so that the early stages are more about the kind of the breadth of the music, about context, about nuances relating to language. This is, for example, to draw on the Mozart, this is where, in our score study, and Christopher Wilkins and I communicate about things like this, we make decisions about language. Do we want to perform this piece utilizing ecclesiastical Latin, or do we want to utilize Germanic Latin? Because if we do, that bears semblance on how we articulate, how we phrase. So once those decisions are made, then I want the singers, the chorus, to engage with the text very early on as well, because it sets the default posture for how they begin to sing. And then after we've kind of gotten through those initial stages in the early parts of the rehearsal process, then I start to look at movements or particular sections that may need more, extra TLC, extra attention. So the Mozart, for example, the fugal materials, the Kyrie fugue, which then is brought back in a recapitulation at the end of the Requiem and the Süssmayr completion. looking at difficult transition material. I go through and in my study, I identify those spots, and we may isolate some of those in sectional rehearsals. We may spend, budget more time in rehearsal to look at those things. So the center of the rehearsal process, as we get now into rehearsals 3, 4, 5, 6, then we're into the middle of the hourglass. It becomes more narrowly focused. And then as we get into, let's say, rehearsals 7 and 8, then we're starting to think broad again. We're thinking about the performative aspects of the music. We're thinking about rhetoric, character, orchestration, starting to dive now and provide more information, providing more information about the full score and about what they'll hear in the larger sonic texture when they're with the orchestra. So the rehearsal process looks very much like this, like that hourglass. And within any given rehearsal, typically we begin with a vocal warm-up, and that period for a chorus like this, given the length of our rehearsal, and that we're only rehearsing weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, the warm-up may be anywhere between 8 to 15 minutes, so that the voices have time to adequately, get warmed up and prepare for an athletic activity, which singing is. And not only to warm up, for the singers to have the opportunity to warm up vocally, but also to warm up mentally, to start turning the ears on in different ways, listening through that warm-up process, getting reacclimated with the room, over in EJ, and getting a sense of what they're going to hear around them too. So it's always kind of like, when you're on Netflix, and this is an image we can all relate to since we're spending a lot of time on streaming services, and that message comes up, an episode comes on, and it says, do you want to resume playing or play from the beginning? And if I'm only 5 minutes into the episode, I'll say, yeah, it's been a couple days. I'll just play it from the beginning again and see, kind of see what I forgot. And sometimes the rehearsal process can be that way when we have downtime in between, from rehearsal to rehearsal. It's reacclimating with each other. And then there comes a point, usually it's somewhere around, 25 to 30 minutes into the rehearsal where things start to kind of lock back into gear, and it's okay. We know this, we've done this before. And then we start to build on what we've already established together.
So then, what's it like then? You get the chorus ready, but then we get to rehearsal week for a performance where the chorus is going to be on stage with the symphony, and you have to pass it off to Christopher Wilkins. What's that process like, and what's it kind of like? This is you're my baby. This is my baby. Now I'm passing it off to, to him. And does
Yeah, historically, I mean, these relationships between a choral conductor and an orchestral conductor, can be wrought with challenge. Fortunately, with Christopher, it's not at all, because I think, over the course of my first year, I love working with Christopher. We communicate well. We communicate in advance about, ideas stylistically in the music. And this year, when we prepared the Mozart, for example, he, with the Mozart Requiem, you have to make decisions, as I addressed before, not only about language and Latin dialect, but also making decisions about completion and addition. And so very early on, he sent me a recording of that Bernard Labadie, conductor, did with La Violon du Roi, and said, "This is kind of what I'm after stylistically. It's the Levin completion, but take a listen." And I said, "Okay, this gives me a sense about how how the orchestra will be approaching it, kind of things that he wants to hear from the chorus." And then usually early on, I'll put my markings in a score, and then I'll scan and send that over to the chorus, upload it so that they can transfer those markings into their scores. And I'll share those with Christopher as well, so that we're on the same page in terms of releases, carryovers, cutoffs, all the kind of nuts and bolts. So then that way, when we get further into the rehearsal process and the chorus is with the orchestra for the first time, things aren't a surprise, because we have very little time together. We're putting performance concerts together in oftentimes with one orchestra rehearsal and then a dress, and then coming on stage for performance. So I think the biggest challenge in working two conductors navigating this process together occurs more in the nuances of gesture. So when working with me, they may be used to to seeing something that they see differently with Christopher. So it's maybe less of a difference of interpretation and more of a difference in how that interpretation is communicated. through the gesture itself. And that takes some getting used to for the chorus, but have had a long, and wonderful relation with Christopher too. So there's a trust that's been, built there. And he, often will come into our rehearsal, our last chorus rehearsal too, to have a sense of where the chorus is with their preparation and what he needs to prioritize and listen for as it comes together with the orchestra.
This is ASO Conversations. Our guest tonight is Chris Albanese, director of the Akron Symphony Chorus. And on Facebook, since during your discussion, the question you were answering, Hannah Good checked in, and if you have a fan in her, she says your gesturing and posturing while conducting makes it incredibly simple for us as an ensemble to follow your nuances. It really communicates how you interpret the score, and I feel that eventually becomes routine after a few rehearsals with you. Once we get to performance night, I feel that even though you aren't the one conducting us, that interpretation is heard by the audience. So, well done.
Oh, thank you, Hannah. It's always nice to hear those things. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got a fan.
And wonderful to work with you too through the course of this year too. And Hannah did a little bit of solo work for us, a duet part in the Walton back in the fall as well.
Oh, mm-hmm.
A little duet section. And I that's for me, I know a lot of conductors, we have the reputation sometimes of being ornery people and, being so tied to our vision and our idea for the music. And I just see that conductors' attitudes everywhere are changing in that regard. And the process is just becoming so much more collaborative in a wonderful way. And so the way I address it with my conducting students at Indiana too is that I said there's this circular relationship, and this is a term that is not my own. I borrowed from Joseph Flummerfeld, who passed away just 2 years ago while living in Indianapolis and was a famed conductor with the New York Philharmonic Chorus and Westminster Choir College. But he talked about this circular relationship, and it really stuck with me that the conductor's role is not only to communicate their vision, but that vision is it's not solid. It's fluid. And the vision in and of itself is adapting and changing in the moment as well, based on the responsiveness of the singers. There's so many variables that enter the room for any given rehearsal. Maybe it's the day after the Gospel Meets Symphony concert and everybody's tired. And so what I do, and they're singing behind the beat. So I need to show something differently. And if the choir's behind the beat, I'm thinking about gesturing smaller, more condensed, more focused, because this is harder to follow when the chorus is behind than this, because I'm using more space. So modifications are made in the moment. And I think any successful conductor needs to be attuned to what is happening in the room too, and adjusting very quickly. Okay. So it becomes not a process of following the ensemble. That's not the conductor's role either, but there's kind of a synchronicity of leadership and engaging and saying, come with me, and then also hearing what's coming back and being proactively responsive too.
Okay. So sticking with the chorus, this was your first season with the chorus. We had to obviously cut the season short a little bit, but how'd the first year go? How do you feel?
It was a wonderful first year. I love the spirit of the chorus, their dedication, and I think what we accomplished together musically over the course of the year was really wonderful to bear witness to, and kind of where we were at the beginning of the year and where we came. I'm only sorry that things were cut short the way that they were as we were preparing for our standalone concert. Mm-hmm. But you start to learn each other, both on a personal level and then on an artistic level. You kind of learn what makes each other tick. And you also start to learn, as one of the surprising just joys of this profession for me has come in, with larger groups especially. It's tempting to look out and just see one body of sound, one body of people, and forget that these are, 90 dynamic individuals too. So the more I get to know the chorus as a whole, the more I get to know each singer on an individual level as well. and not only what makes them tick and what energizes them as artists and creative people, but how their voices are designed, what the specific challenges may be in one particular section, or with one particular singer even. And I feel like over the course of this year, I've started to grow in my knowledge of who they are collectively and who they are individually too. And that's been one of the really fun parts of this too. And an aspect that I think will only benefit us as we move into the future together too.
So for anyone out there who's thinking that, hey, I'd like to, I can sing, I might want to, go out and look to become a chorus member. What do you look for? What kind of advice you could give, or what do you think makes for a good chorus member?
Yeah, a number of things, and vocal ability is obviously and it seems like a kind of a prerequisite, obviously. But what that means, I think, is different for everybody. And there are singers who possess, really fine solo instruments, but without the flexibility or the sensitivity to sing well in an ensemble. So, if anything, choral singing to me is I've worked as in the operatic world, on the concert stage, and then also as a choral and chamber music singer. And I think singing in the choral and the chamber settings requires the most skill in terms of flexibility, because you're singing so many different, genres, styles of music. You're constantly being asked to adapt. You're being asked to listen a different way and be attuned what's the reference sound around you. Not that solo performers don't do that as well, but it's a little bit less narrowly focused. It really requires a sensitivity and an ability to collaborate that's fairly unique. So those are things that we're looking for. I'm looking for generosity, both in your musicianship and your artistry, and also in your personality too. That these are people who want to collaborate, that they're dedicated, that they're in for the process, that they're open to instruction, to feedback. They want to improve, because we never stay static in anything that we do. We're always working to make more meaningful art and music together. So that willingness to stay open, to work harder, to create more meaningfully is so important.
You mentioned a couple of times that you used to perform in operas. Do you have any interesting or fun stories from your time as an opera singer?
I do, yeah. Actually, the first one that comes to mind, when I was 22, 23 years old, I was singing a summer festival, the Castleton Music Festival down in Central Virginia, beautiful area in the Shenandoah Valley. And Loren Moselle, famous conductor, the Cleveland Orchestra, Vienna Staatsoper, and it was his festival, and it was held on his property in Castleton as well. And he, I remember my very first role. I was 22 years old, singing a small bit role at the end of the Ravel, L'Enfant et le Sortilège, and I sang a line, and I was sweating the whole time through the entire rehearsal until my, through the first time that I sang. And afterwards he comes up and I finished, and he just claps his hands and says bravo, and okay, got through that, and then I came back 10 minutes later, sung another bit part, and he looks at me again and says, "Your French needs work." And I thought, oh, that's not what I wanted to hear. But it's just one of those moments that's kind of etched in memory for some reason, and kept me at that stage of development thinking, okay, there's always so much further to go, and really kind of inspired me to work harder and to think, at that stage of my development, no matter how small the role is, it's important to do it well. And so I'm very fortunate that I had experiences being around folks like that, being around folks in regional opera too, who challenged and pushed me to be the best that I could. And in that world too, things are often, productions are being mounted very quickly. You have to work quickly. You have to be kind of focused and on top of things. And I think working in that environment really helped to discipline me more for a life in conducting too. So I'm grateful for that. And side story with Maestro Mazel too. I remember one afternoon, this is unrelated to opera, but I was over in one of the manor houses on the property and was just kind of playing around on the piano, playing Gershwin, the man I love, and a friend of mine, a mezzo soprano, was singing with me, and he walks into the room and hears us and then says, do you mind if I sit in? And he starts. I had no idea he was a very accomplished jazz pianist too. And for a couple of hours that afternoon, we just kind of jammed together and sung Gershwin, sung Cole Porter, music of the Great American Songbook. And again, just one of those really formative experiences that I'll never forget, as a 22-year-old to be in that room and, when like that and see the breadth of his experience and interest musically too was very, very cool.
So what is one thing that people may not know about or realize about the Akron Symphony Chorus?
I think, first of all, just if I were to tally up kind of the collective years of experience, amongst all of these folks, it's just astronomical. So many of them have been around this organization for so long, and they've worked with so many conductors and have stories about these conductors too that they've worked with that are really just fascinating. I relish any opportunity that I can get to connect with some of our longer serving singers, because they provide such a valuable window into the history of the organization, the context, and really just the rich musical scene that exists in Akron and in Northeast Ohio. And that's really cool to be around. I think also maybe people don't realize, just on, by the face value, the amount of work that goes into what these folks do together, that it's beyond just the rehearsal itself. But when they're not in rehearsal, that these are people who are working 9-to-5 jobs, most of them, some in music, and a good number have studied music in college or are singing in churches or working in church music, conductors themselves, or working in the public schools as choral directors, but many are working other jobs or at home or retired and continue to devote their time and energy to this in a meaningful way. And so that's something that I think is, I hope that our audience recognizes as well, as just the outstanding commitment level and the commitment they have to doing this at the highest level too.
One question that came in that we had: what choral works are on your bucket list?
Yeah, that's a good one. Wow. I mean, at this point, so many. So, because I like to consider myself, somewhat young in years, or at least in biological age at this point, although I'm getting older every day, and the receding hairline proves that now, and it's receding even more with, with the birth of my son. But I feel fortunate that, hopefully there's a long career ahead of me. So there's so much at this point that I haven't done. And that I want to do. So, I mean, okay, if I could kind of go and hit you with a couple of pieces representing different, stylistic periods. I would start, I've sung numerous Monteverdi Vespers as a soloist and as a chorister, but never conducted the piece, and I would like to conduct the Monteverdi Vespers. I developed about 10 years ago an interest in colonial music of New Spain. Late 16th, early 17th century music of the Spanish colonies, particularly music of Juan Gutierrez de Padilla, who is a conductor born in and worked in south of Spain, in Cadiz and Jerez, and then eventually ended up in the New World, working in Puebla in the cathedral there, which had a very vibrant musical cultural scene at the time. And it developed this, kind of piqued my interest in colonial music, music of Mexico. And another piece by a composer who was actually Italian born, Ignacio Jerusalem. Jerusalem was born in Italy, also very cosmopolitan, found his way eventually to Spain, to Malaga, and then to Mexico City, where he also worked as a kapellmeister there at the cathedral. now this is later. He's working in the mid 18th century, and his music and his manuscripts found their way all the way up into the California missions. And there's an edition of a piece of his, the Matins for the Virgin of Guadalupe. The edition that I first encountered was put together by a friend, colleague of mine, Craig H. Russell, who's a musicologist based in San Luis Obispo, works at Cal Poly University there. And I've had the opportunity to study this repertoire with Craig, and he composed this edition of the Matins of the Virgin of Guadalupe by Ignacio Jerusalem for Chanticleer, for a recording that the group did long before my tenure, back in 1996 or 7, I want to say. But it's a piece that's been on my list as well, for a number of reasons. The Mozart Mass in C minor would be on that list as well. I've sung it, never conducted it, and actually never prepared it either. That would make the list. The Britain War Requiem, which was one of the first major works that I performed as a chorister as an undergraduate, would be on that list. Stravinsky Symphony of Psalms, Poulenc Figure Humaine would be on that list for a cappella repertoire. Just stunning use of texture. Poulenc has just always, I think, just kind of resonated with my musical soul. And there's something about the tragicomic nature of what he does and the frivolity of it, but then also the seriousness under which he was composing, especially with a piece like the Figure Humaine and its connection to the Great War and what it communicates and reveals about human nature, I think is really meaningful. So I find that I'm connected to music often. There's just oftentimes I think what's the connection with all of these pieces? And one thing for me that I've noticed is that pieces for me, or composers who are operating under some kind of musical modicum or speaking to a larger philosophical truth, and sometimes that truth is revealed consciously in the music, and sometimes it's being revealed very unconsciously. And just kind of seeps its way into the pores of the music itself. Haydn is a composer who I view very much in this light, operating out of a late Enlightenment perspective and elucidating so many themes of the Enlightenment and what he knew and learned from his time as a Freemason and working with in the salons and communicating with figures of the English Enlightenment, and it just all comes out in those late masses and in the oratorios and in creation especially, and so that to me is really compelling, and also music that holds conflicting ideas in some type of synchronous or dialectic balance. Haydn does this so frequently. Mozart does it in other ways. Britten does it in the War Requiem, through his representation of the Axis and the Allied forces. And there's just something to me that's very meaningful about purposeful conflict in music, and that musical development is used as a tool to illuminating some type of new understanding about something philosophically, spiritually. Looking at all those pieces, I think that maybe my interest in music of the New World too. I mean, it was this convergence of forces of these the imperialist Spanish coming to the New World and encountering indigenous folks who were learning plain chant, learning hymn singing, and oftentimes composing polyphony, and what are those encounters? What does the music tell us about those encounters that those people had? That's just interesting and compelling to me.
A couple more of your fans have checked in on Facebook. Don Horner says Chris is an amazing educator as well as a very talented musician. And then Kelly, I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, Fear. One of my favorite reasons to sing with your direction is the joy you bring to practice and musicianship encouragement. Practice never drags, and the attitude that comes with direction is always one of respect for each member of the chorus. Thank you for all your hard work.
Well, thank you, Kelly and Don. I appreciate that. Yeah.
All right. So we have just a couple more minutes here. We're going to go through a couple of questions to kind of bring out a little more of your non-musical personality.
Sure.
So real quick, favorite movie or TV show?
Oh, wow. Favorite movie is Coen Brothers movie, The Big Lebowski. It has been since I was in high school.
Want to have that?
Yeah, huge fan of the Coen Brothers. Television show, a number. I was a big Arrested Development fan, still am. Seinfeld, big Seinfeld fan. Curb Your Enthusiasm as well. I've been getting, this is much darker, but I've recently gotten into Breaking Bad on Netflix.
Yes.
And never watched it 10 years ago when it was it was coming out, but it's just phenomenal, the Shakespearean aspects and what it speaks to about our human nature and the dark side of our nature too. I had a friend who said, during a pandemic, why did you start watching that? He said, I'd be watching lighter things, and I said, I don't know, it's just something's kind of drawn me into the story. So that's been with me. That's one that's been with me recently too. But I find that I always kind of get into television about 10 years after it's relevant. So that's typical for me. And I'm a big sports fan too. I just completed the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary, and enjoyed watching that, and really driven by. I enjoy the stories of athletes and how they hone their craft, and just the similarities between music and sports too. There are more than than meet the eye. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really, really well done. And, I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I would, because I lived through it. So I watched his whole career. So I remembered many of those moments. Wasn't really exciting watching the whole part about the Cavs, but what are you going to do? But no, they did a really, really nice job.
Yeah.
So, favorite food?
Actually, I just prepared it and had it a little bit ago. I'd say pasta carbonara. I'm Italian and come from an Italian family, so carbonara is one that's made a lot. Linguine con vongole, white clam sauce. Another one that I do. Actually, recently, Bob Porco, who's was conductor with the Cleveland Orchestra Chorus and Cincinnati May Festival. The Cincinnati May Festival has been doing a series of recipes with Bob, I think bi-weekly or so, and he posted his recipe for just a classic marinara sauce, and so I gave that one a try too. I've always made marinara differently. His recipe is very simple, and I've really liked the recipe, so I think it's going to stick with me. But I love to cook too, and especially Italian food, Mexican food. We're kind of all over. I make Korean food, tried sag paneer for the first time the other day, Indian. I'm all over the map with it.
Okay, now we're getting ideas for next time we have you on. We're going to do a cooking segment. Forget the music.
I would love to.
So maybe we can schedule that later on this summer.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. If you could only hear one musician or band played live, doesn't matter what the genre is, who would it be?
Wow. Oh, and it's got to be one. I'm not good at the one answer questions, Tom. I'm sorry.
We'll build the concert out then. We'll build the Monsters of Rock concert here, or it doesn't have to be rock. I'm leading the witness here.
Okay, so if we're going, sure, rock and roll. The Rolling Stones have always been one on my bucket list. Are these living artists, deceased? Any?
Only hear any of them.
Okay, boy, I'd love to go back and hear the Miles Davis quintet, John Coltrane. Wow. Just so many. I'm thinking, I had the opportunity when I was an undergrad on a choir tour to hear the Berlin Philharmonic perform Mahler 4 with Renee Fleming as the soprano and Claudio Abbado conducting. And that was a pretty bucket list experience. And it just happened that we were in Berlin the evening of the performance. So I guess I've heard Berlin. I would love to hear Vienna. And have had the fortune of performing at the Musikverein, but have not heard that orchestra live. I'd say that would be up there too. So if we're saying classical, I'd say Vienna Philharmonic, rock and roll, the Rolling Stones, and jazz, we'll say John Coltrane.
Okay, excellent. Well, that I think we are out of time. Thank you to everyone who joined us on Facebook. Thank you, Chris, for taking the time to do this. I know everybody's schedule is a little crazy right now, but definitely appreciate you taking the time. I think this was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Tom. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for the great questions, and great to get to share the conversation with you too.
All right,
Yeah.
excellent. And everyone, thank you again to everyone for watching us, and we will be back again soon with another episode of ASO Conversations. Everybody be well.
Take care. Thanks.